Okay, consumption. Consumption, we write as a function of disposable income. In other words, what we say is C is equal to A plus B times YD. This is our intercept term, this is our slope term. We assume that both are positive. So what we say with a positive value of B is that as our income increases, we tend to consume more. Let's talk more about this equation. The A term we call autonomous consumption. The B term we call the marginal propensity to consume. Autonomous consumption is essentially the constant term in the equation. For those that know more about modeling, we would call it an exogenous variable. A, you will notice, does not change as YD changes, and so it's not determined by YD. The marginal propensity to consume, however, which is the slope of the equation, as a slope we know that it is the derivative, and the derivative gives us, or as an equation, gives it, or as a fraction gives us dc by dy, and as like any other straight line equation, if we had y equals mx plus c, m, the slope, which is dy by dx, dc by dyd will tell us how consumption changes if income changes. How consumption changes if income changes. Not to be confused with the average propensity to consume, which is simply consumption divided by YD. In other words, the average amount of our income which we spend on consumption. The marginal propensity to consume gives us the proportion of additional income consumed, right? The key being additional. How does C change if YD changes? So let's look at that as a graph, right? We've got consumption versus disposable income. Our graph is telling us that as our income goes up, the amount that we wish to spend also increases. It's a straight line. Of course, we could make this more complicated and make it a curvy line, but a straight line serves our purposes. You'll notice that the A term, right, autonomous consumption, this is the amount that we consume even though our income is zero. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Here, our slope, our marginal propensity to consume, is 0.75. This tells us that if our income changes by 200, our consumption will change by 0.75 times 200, which equals 150. Here's a video that I found talking more about consumption made by UNISA, so you are welcome to watch that in your own time. What are the determinants of our consumption function? When we talk about determinants, we mean what is going to shift the graph up or down. And in that sense, we're talking about what changes the value of A. In other words, the amount that we would consume even though we have no income. Well, obviously, our current wealth. If we have money already, wealth already, we don't need to earn any income in order to be able to consume. Even if we were not earning, we would have to consume in order to stay alive, and that would be determined by our wealth. Our net asset value obviously is influenced by our debt as well. The more debt we have, the less we are able to borrow as well in order to consume without earning any income, in other words, A. The real interest rate affects, well, that also affects the amount that we are able to borrow. It affects the value of our debt, and it therefore affects our overall wealth. Prices affect our current wealth. The higher the prices are, the lower the real value of our wealth. Expectations, whenever we talk about determinants, expectations are a factor because what you think is going to happen in the future influences your actions now. Then I've got income taxes with a question mark. The reason there's a question mark is because in our consumption function with disposable income on the x-axis, disposable income is y minus t. Okay? In other words, it takes into account t. The higher the tax is, the less our disposable income is. In other words, all we would do is move along this function. We wouldn't shift the entire function. However, what we will see is that when we expand this into our aggregate expenditure model and we plot consumption against real domestic product or income or just y, then if we change t, we do shift the consumption function. When y is on the x-axis and we change t, consumption shifts. When y is not on the x-axis, in other words, when yd is on the x-axis, then all it is a movement along the curve. Right, so that brings us to the savings function. We'll talk about that in the next video.